Arcade Heroes.
Greetings, it's Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and today's subject is one that, at least for arcade operators like myself, tends to cause the most frustration and complaints than maybe anything else in this business, at least in my experience, and that's maintenance and parts and repairs of arcade machines. Now, if you've ever gone into an arcade and they have a bunch of machines down, you immediately have a negative impression of that arcade, and that is something that sometimes people really exaggerate, as I've had people post reviews saying half their arcades were broken, and in part we don't always turn all the games on in the mornings. I have to be open pretty early in the morning at my mall locations per my contract, and not many people are going out to an arcade at 10, 11 in the morning. You know, it's more of a night thing. But since I have to be open, I don't want to waste all that electricity, and so I'll keep them down. But even then, I've seen a review or two over the years where they make up that half the arcades are broken when they came in later in the day, or they say, half of them had an out of order sign on them, and it's really, out of the 60 games, maybe at most 8 have an out of order sign. That's not most, but still, it's one of those things that happens and it causes a bad impression. Now, as an arcade operator, one doesn't want to have all your games down. You want to have as many working as possible, because a working game is an earning game, and so it's vitally important that you stay on top of that. But sometimes there are things that break down and they're very difficult to resolve, or in my case, I may not have all the time in the world to be focused on fixing them. One that's been a real headache are these two ICE NBA hoops sitting behind me. About November last year, they both failed, had some odd problem, and I had to kind of shotgun it to figure out what was wrong. And I'm still trying to figure out what's wrong with this one here, because I replaced the motor, I had the board sent in for repair, I've replaced the ball gate, and it's just about everything has been replaced, and yet it still doesn't work properly, and so I'm still scratching my head about that. But I am talking with ICE tech support to hopefully get it figured out. And that is one of the questions that can arise is, well, what do you do when your games break? Now, in my situation, being an independent arcade, I've had to teach myself a lot of things about this business. I took an electronics class in high school, but looking back, it's like I probably should have taken more than that, or maybe taken a college course or something as well, just to help myself get more up to speed on that. But I've learned a lot over the years, and later in the video I'll share some links to places that I know of, some resources that I know of that you can also use to get some tech help. But in my situation, of course, where I'm not a giant chain arcade, I am the technician, and so that's where I've had to learn out of necessity. I can't afford to have a part-time or a full-time arcade technician on staff, but if that is a career that interests you, it could be a lucrative one. I've seen some independent contractors do all right in that regard, at least with the prices that some of them charge, because they'll charge for their travel and charge for their time, charge for parts and all of that. And I've even done some of that myself, but I like to think that I'm pretty reasonable on my rates when I can handle that. Still, if you are going to be an independent arcade operator, or maybe you're just a collector and these sorts of things interest you, then I'll be sharing those. But again, what do you do when the game breaks down? Well, if it's a newer game, that's generally easier, because you can contact the manufacturer and contact their technical support department and get some help there. And hopefully you get a hold of somebody that knows what they're doing. Now, sometimes there are people that leave these positions and new ones come in that don't have a lot of experience, and so I totally get that. I spent years in the IT field prior to this. I worked at tech support for a while for some big computer companies, and so I understand their end of it. And so for me, when I contact a tech support department, it's usually where I have done everything that I can think of first. You generally start with power and go from there. But of course, it depends on the issue too. It depends on what's going on. But sometimes, particularly with mechanical things like basketball machines or pinball machines, at least for me, it's still one that I'm really learning on. But with video games, it usually seems that power is one of the places to first check and make sure that there's consistent power going to whatever component it is in the machine. But the manufacturer can often help you out with that, as since they have a tech support department, they should have records of what's gone well, what's gone not so well on their machines, and generally speaking, newer games won't have as many problems as older games, but that's not always true. I've had a few instances of newer games that had some pretty major issues not long after I got them. The most egregious of which was my Batman from 2012, 2013, around there, where 3 days after I got it, the monitor went out. It died completely. Now, fortunately, because it was that soon into its lifespan, warranty covered a replacement monitor. The only thing that sucked for me was that I got it maybe about a week or so before Christmas, a very busy time of year, and so I had this brand new game sitting there, and during the busiest time of year I could not get the monitor for it because most of the parts places were closed. That is one complaint that I often have, is that if anything breaks down in December time, like after Thanksgiving, it takes forever to get stuff, and that's historically speaking. Right now with the continued supply chain issues and all that, it's even worse. And so just hopefully your things don't break down during your busy seasons, but maybe it's Moore's Law or something like that that says that they will. And so you can try and plan ahead for that, but just remember to contact tech support if you can. There's also manual resources. Most manufacturers have manuals on their website, but not all of them. These days, a lot of games don't come with manuals anymore. They just do it digitally. And so you can check there or contact their service department to see if you can get a manual. If it's still difficult to get a hold of one, there might be some distributors out there that have manuals. Primetime Amusements, which is a sponsor on the Arcade Heroes website, has a huge manuals section of PDFs that you can refer to. And that's also a good thing that I need to get a little better at, making sure I check the manual. I guess just sometimes I've gotten burned where I'll look in the manual and it has nothing to really help me as to what the exact problem is. Now, granted, the manual can't anticipate everything that's going to happen out there, but hopefully manufacturers will update manuals, since they're doing it digitally anyway, so they don't have to reprint it. They just have to make a new PDF, but adding issues into that and solutions as to how to solve those problems. Now, of course, if you're talking about retro games, then that's a different beast altogether. Now, fortunately, thanks to the size of the collector community and the passion behind it, there are different resources out there to go to, whether it's on Facebook and different arcade groups, or you also have places like KLOV, the KLOV forums, or the Arcade Control forums. I think there's JAMA forums, if I'm remembering correctly, that you can go to and just create a post and ask and say, hey, here's the problem that I'm experiencing, what can I do to fix it? And again, the more detail that you can provide when there is an issue and things that you've already tried, it will help you get a better solution quicker. And so always something to keep in mind, just a general tech support sort of thing. Now, one of the most common questions I've received over the years from people who are looking to get into the business, and it's an important one, and one that I wondered myself before I got into the business, was what can you expect to spend on repairs, maintenance, parts over the course of a year? Now, the reason why that's almost an impossible question to answer is because in part, it just depends on chance. Like, you never know when something like this is going to break down. can depend on the quality of the brand, of those who made it, of the brand of the parts, and how long it's operated, how often it gets played, and then of course the game mixture of what you have in your arcade. Each one is going to be different from another, and so if you have an arcade that's full of more new games, then it's going to generally have fewer problems than older ones like retrocades. Like, I imagine that the repair costs of the Galloping Ghost arcade are going to be much higher than, say, a Dave & Buster's, but there's just too many variables to know. Or like if you have a lot of mechanical games like basketball, pinball, mechanical redemption games, and so on, that it will affect those costs. But still, to give you an idea, again, just from my experience, I wish I had numbers from other operators out there to maybe help create more of an average, but this is just what I've seen over the past 5 years on what I've spent. Now, interestingly enough, 2017 was which is as far back as I decided to look, happens to be the most expensive year for maintenance, and that was, I spent $9,193.63 on that aspect that year. But then the next year I spent less. It was $4,950.13. In 2019, which was the best year performance that I've seen in the 14 years that I've been doing this, I spent $8,733.01 on maintenance costs. And then 2020, of course, year of the pandemic, I made less, spent less than general. $4,615.81, and then last year it went back up again to $8,755.72, and so maybe that helps you have an idea. And this, at least from the years 2017 through 2019, I only had one location, and throughout that time I've had about, I'd say, 60 games or so, and a mixture of new, old, pinball, air hockey, foosball, basketball. And when it comes to the games that break down the most, it's definitely the more mechanical ones. Like, I've replaced things on my air hockey table and my sensors on my foosball table, even the motor on the foosball table multiple times. I've had this issue with both of these machines. I was lucky to get this one finally working not long ago. But it's been a bit of a headache. And of course, pinball also can be a big headache. And one complaint that I've heard others mention recently is that, like, Stern Pinball historically has had great technical support, but they changed something recently where they're no longer picking up the phone just through email, and that's rubbing a lot of people the wrong way. So I don't know if that's just a temporary thing or what, but I think, especially in this business, people really like to pick up the phone. Now, sometimes for me as an operator, when I have a tech support guy wanting to call and talk over the phone, it's like, well, it would be more convenient for me to just get an email with details as to what I can try, what I can do, as opposed to the phone, because I'm not always at the location, especially where I have two locations. Now, it can be difficult to be there at the right time to call on the phone and whatnot, and if I have the instructions in hand, it's just easier. But that was one nice thing with ICE. They sent me kind of a troubleshooting flow chart on these games specifically, and so that was a nice one. I wish more manufacturers would send something like that along. But that also reminds me, in the talk about manuals, is that some manuals are better than others. I kind of mentioned that already. Like, pinball manuals tend to be super detailed, almost too detailed, but you still need that just because there's so many variables and what can go wrong there. The only frustration there is that it can be a little difficult to find, like, part numbers of some little thing that you need to figure out there. But I do appreciate that they do have that level of detail there. It's just somewhat of a pain to find, but I know, like, Jersey Jack Pinball has offered the manuals within the game itself, so you can pull up the game on the video screen and use that there if you need it. But in general, I've had good experiences with tech support for the most part. There have been couple of times over the years where it hasn't been so great, and that maybe comes sometimes from a distributor, sometimes from a manufacturer, and it varies on the people that you're dealing with. And I can't remember the name of one technician in particular at Sega that I didn't care for, but I was able to get a hold of somebody else at Sega who was super helpful and helped me resolve the issues for the one problem that I had. But that kind of leads into a lot of the frustrations there. And as mentioned, contacting tech support from the manufacturer is great, but sometimes they may tell you to contact a distributor, and like, who's the distributor you bought it from, contact them, as most distributors should have some kind of technician on staff to be able to help with that. And that can also be where the warranty applies. Now that leads us to warranties, as there are warranties on brand new games in the business, but to be perfectly honest, they're not very good for the most part. There have been some decent warranties that I have seen, the most impressive of which was Raw Thrills offering a 3-year warranty on the computers for some of their games. I think Ninja Turtles was one of them, and I think it applied to just HP computers for a while, but I'm not sure if that's still in place after the pandemic. But that one was a pretty good one. For the most part in the business though, they are about 90 days. But the most frustrating thing that I found in practice is that there's a lot of these little exceptions that can pop up when, say, something goes wrong with a controller, and then suddenly there's this exception that you can't find any record of anywhere, where the tech support department says, well, there's only a 30-day warranty on parts of that type and not the 90-day warranty, or something that should be maybe a little bit longer. And so that tends to make one frustrated, which leads into the next problem, and that's the cost of parts in this business. Now, the cost of parts can be all over the place. There are a few part suppliers out there, mainly the biggest one would be Suzo Hap, and sometimes they have decent prices. I've seen parts from places like Twisted Quarter and Paradise Arcade Shop, but it can vary as to how much the parts cost. Generally, newer stuff is going to cost you a lot more, but it also depends on the brand. Certain brands, generally Japanese brands, tend to have sometimes some ridiculous prices on their parts that just feels like gouging, as it's like there's no way that this part should cost $800, but that's what they're charging. In fact, I came across that not long ago with Namco Nirin, where it needed to replace the power supply, but I guess they did something to the power supply to make it more proprietary, and instead of it being like a $50 part, which is most likely how much it costs them, they wanted almost $800 for it, and to me that's just outrageous. But it's like, what are you going to do with it? Now in that case, I'm sending it into a place and I'm hoping that they're not going to charge me that much to repair it, but still, there's a lot of parts where you can find equivalent components sometimes if you know what the actual part number is. A lot of manufacturers will change the part numbers so that you have to try and go through them and not just buy it off of eBay or something. You can see where they put massive markups on things. Like one example are graphics cards, since most arcade games these days use PCs in them. And if a graphics card goes out, that graphics card may only cost $50 on the online market, but to get the one has a special BIOS put onto it from the arcade manufacturer, then again you're spending $700-800 for that $50 card and the specialized BIOS, which again is ridiculous. I mean, I understand that manufacturers need to make money too, but when it's just so blatantly over the top with like a 10,000% markup, then we know we're getting screwed, and that doesn't make us like your brand or want to buy more of your machines in the future when you do that. And so just something to throw out there that tends to be a major complaint amongst operators. And if any salespeople are ever wondering why maybe somebody doesn't want to get a game from their brand, maybe they like the game, but they just don't want to touch the brand. And I've heard many operators say that there are certain brands that they just won't touch, and mainly it's because of their experience in dealing with maintenance and repair afterwards. Now, something that's more frustrating perhaps than warranty, and this is related to the cost of parts, are when you have parts that are engineered in such a way that it makes repairing them difficult. And so this right here is the base of a gun from Jurassic Park Arcade by Raw Thrills. And what happened here is that this metal piece, this may be difficult to see, at least with this lighting, but down in here there was a weld that held this cylinder piece in place. And what they did is they fed all of the wires to power the solenoid, and you also have the potentiometer sensors in here. And so this would, of course, was made to swivel around and everything, but the weld broke on this. And so I thought that, I could just get this part here and it should be relatively easy to replace. Well, no, not at all. Because of the way that they engineered this, for one, this base here, it's a whole piece, and so it doesn't come off, which makes it very difficult to get down to remove certain nuts. I've managed to get it to a point where it's mostly workable, but there's also this specialized part in the middle here, this kind of weird bolt, and ended up having to order a different one. And then when I got all that stuff in, I discovered that you can't get these wires out. The only way I can do it is cutting them. And this one has been super, super frustrating. This has definitely been the most frustrating Raw Thrills related repair that I've ever had to deal with. Because the gun's been down for a little bit now, and obviously the game's not earning as well as it could because of this. But I've also had to spend a bit of money because I don't want to spend $700 on a whole replacement gun assembly. But the way this was engineered, it makes it feel like that's what they want you to do, is to get a new, whole new gun instead of being able to just replace the component that broke. Now, granted, I get it that sometimes things have to be engineered in certain ways to, you have to have it has to be user friendly, but it also has to withstand little kids pounding on it and whatnot. And so again, some things will just fail over time, but still, when it's like, gosh, I wish I could just easily replace this metal piece that cost like $100, but it's become a total nightmare to actually do that, and that's why I also haven't finished doing that yet. But I've come across this on a few other games too. Once I had to get to the power supply in my Dance Dance Revolution Extreme, and instead of it being like a 5-minute sort of thing, I think it took like 20 minutes to get that thing out, just because of the way it almost seemed a little over-engineered there. And so it becomes something that maybe has to deal with quality as well. Granted, you don't want to be wasting money and time on cheap quality stuff. That's why a lot of American operators just won't touch Chinese-made games, because not only are the manuals really bad and the translations oftentimes don't make sense, or they just don't really have any details, but they may not have the experience to know what needs to be done in a gun to make it better and make it easy to fix, but also make it last as long as possible. Now, here are a few places that I've used for repair and tech help. I'm not getting paid to share these. I'm not suggesting that you have to use them. I'm just pointing them out as people that or companies that I've worked with before to help resolve some of the issues that I have, and I'll put the links in the description below. But I know there are some other companies out there that both fix machines and sell parts, and they may just be plenty fine. I just haven't used them, and so I can't personally vouch for them. With all of these, I not had a bad experience. The only times I've had anything go wrong would be with the post office not mailing it to me in a reasonable amount of time. Otherwise, the parts have been fine and the service has been fast. But these are just ones that you can probably look at the reviews and whatnot as you do your research. So there you have it. That's my experience on parts in this business and repairs and whatnot. And so hopefully this has been a helpful video for you. If you have any comments, things to add that I might have missed, or just experiences of your own, good or bad, I do like to hear the good stuff too, then just comment below and let me know if there's other subjects you'd like me to tackle here down the line. But thanks for watching. Catch you on the next video.